Welcome back to Bills and Business. I'm Lauren Davis, the co-founder of USLege, and my guest today is Kevin Frazier. He's the Director of AI Innovation and Law Program at the University of Texas School of Law. He's also the Senior Fellow at the Abundance Institute. And Kevin studies how regulatory ecosystems can accelerate AI adoption. He's testified before Congress on AI, been published in the MIT Tech Review, and he co-hosts the Scaling Laws podcast, which is how we met. He's also worked at companies like Google and Cloudflare in tech himself. So, Kevin, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for joining.
On
the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me. I've been looking forward to it.
Yes, it was such a blast being on your podcast in DC. And I know we talked a lot about the founder side, but now I'm excited to talk to you today about the AI side.
Sounds like a hoot, and I'm so glad you came on Scaling Laws, and please consider this an open invitation to come back on.
Thank you. Yeah, we should chat again in 6 months and see how everything's completely changed with AI, because it's doing that every single day. But yeah, do you want to tell us a little bit more about yourself and your thoughts on AI?
Oh, geez. Okay. Well, we have 4 hours, right? Now, so I'm Kevin Frazier. I'm the Director of the AI Innovation and Law Program at the University of Texas School of Law and a Senior Fellow at the Abundance Institute. And I co-host the Scaling Laws podcast. And my wife likes to joke that my job is to get paid to talk about AI. And she's not wildly wrong. Essentially, my job boils down to helping Texas law students get prepared for thriving in the age of AI. So that means teaching an AI and law course. That means creating programming on campus for all of Austin's incredible innovators, yourself included, to come and visit and share their insights. And then it looks like trying to come up with good policy ideas to help us navigate this crazy AI era, because I think crazy describes both the light and the shade of this AI moment, which is to say that there's so many positive use cases of AI that we can point to. We can point to your own tool, helping people upskill and think about strategic policy decisions, think about the future of the law. And we can also point out some negative sides, right? We've heard about the stories of folks who perhaps have established a problematic relationship with AI. We know that the infrastructure involved with building out AI can be resource intensive. And so how do we navigate those two different polar realities of AI? It's a tough needle to thread, but it's one that I really enjoy studying, because I think getting this technology right is profoundly important, not only to this generation, but for many generations to come, because this technology, as you pointed out earlier, it just keeps changing. It becomes more and more integrated into our daily lives. And so we need strategic, smart policy to get us through this moment.
You're handling a lot right now.
You know, I like to juggle. Not actually. I'm horrible at juggling. But no, I have a lot of bad jokes because my podcast is not nearly as good as yours. And I joke that I have more hats than a haberdasher because I just don't like being bored. It's more fun to keep exploring things. And as long as you're leaning into things that you're curious about, I find that time flies pretty quickly.
Curiosity is probably the number one, I think, indicator of if you're going to enjoy working with AI and continue using it. I find I'm really curious too, and I'm constantly finding just new ways to utilize it. But go ahead.
Yeah, no, I just think asking questions. The more questions you ask, including how do I use you, is a really fun question to ask, and you'll just start going down very weird rabbit holes and some very productive rabbit holes.
Of course. Yeah. And it all ends up being productive in the end because you learn something when you're going through it. How do you balance doing the research it takes to kind of keep up to date with AI, the teaching then of it, and then the policy side is completely different kind of research. So how are you juggling all of that right now?
You know, I think it just comes down to maintaining as robust of an AI diet as possible. So I try to eat, breathe, and sleep AI, much to my wife's chagrin, much to my family's chagrin. I was just with my family on a little vacation, and they very quickly imposed a ban on discussion of AI because me and my brother just kept going on and on about this and that and this new tool and so on and so forth. But I really do think if you are going to stay on the vanguard of where the technology is, you kind of do have to just really lean into podcasts, to archive where you can find the latest technical research on AI, to different substacks of super smart people, and then, of course, to excellent podcasts. And so that's my go-to strategy. Is I'm just so captivated by this technological moment that I try to surround myself with whatever's going on. And because I find all these questions so fascinating, it doesn't always feel like work, including when I get to teach. It's an opportunity to kind of refine my own understanding of what the heck is going on in this moment. And my students are incredibly smart because they're at the University of Texas. And so they help refine my thinking even further, and they tee up some wonderful questions. And so it all kind of fits together in a weird symbiotic relationship.
I love that. And yeah, it sounds like you're very passionate about it and love it. This weekend, my husband and I spent all day Sunday just in a hackathon, pretty much. He's building this really cool thing for our customers. So coming out soon, I won't go say too much, versus Bubble. But I built a personal website using Claude Code, and it was crazy. I can't believe the new design features that it has.
And it's the worst day I will ever have. And what a romantic weekend, by the way. A couples hackathon.
We're very excited about it.
I can't wait for that Netflix rom-com to come out of, a couple that clods together, stays together.
Oh gosh, that is the clip. I'm going to get that clipped for your all your socials.
I love it. That's great. I can pivot into dating advice or something like that. Yeah.
Who knows where the future of that's going?
Oh gosh. Yeah. That's a whole nother podcast.
That's a whole other podcast.
Yeah.
What are the top, 3 resources? And you would say, you mentioned podcasts and there's Substacks, a lot of different learning things. If someone's listening now and wants to just start learning about AI, what would you recommend?
Oh boy, I'm going to be incredibly biased and follow best practices as an academic, which is I do recommend for folks who are interested in AI policy, give Scaling Laws a listen, not to hear my voice, but to hear the folks we bring on. We just had Representative Begich, for example, from Alaska, who's doing a lot of interesting thinking on AI. We had Google's chief economist come on and share his perspectives. And of course, we have founders like yourself who come on and share a lot of wonderful insights. For the folks who are more technical, I think going to Archive, that's ARXIV. That's where you can find the latest and greatest technical breakthroughs. It's a little nerdy, but if you ever get lost in the weeds of some paper, that's what AI is for. You can just upload that paper and say, explain this to me like I'm in high school or maybe 3rd grade or whatever you want to pick. And then I would say, finding the Substacks based off of your own policy interests. I think Jan Leica, who's a technical researcher at Anthropic, does a wonderful job of sharing his insights. Really, the list is kind of endless. And so this is another great AI use case to say, hey, I'm interested in X, Y, and Z. What are the best AI resources here? And I guarantee you're going to find a long list and a growing list because everyone and their mom is now doing some form of AI content, which is wonderful. But finding the right thing for you, I think, is ultimately a sort of personal exercise.
Oh, yes. It's highly personalized. I mean, it's just allowing you to go 100 times faster, I'd say, too, in the general. You have testified before Congress. You've worked in tech companies. You're doing research. You're teaching students. Where does your policy stance lie right now with AI? When it comes to AI governance, like, where are you? We've had a lot of folks on the podcast talk about this, and I'm curious to get your take.
So my shortest encapsulation of my own policy perspective is that we have to learn. And we will not get policy right unless we're doing so in a fashion that really allows for studying, is this policy achieving what we want it to actually do? And that may sound wildly commonsensical to listeners. They're thinking, well, duh, we want policies that are responsive and that change and that iterate over time. Well, the sad reality is that we legislate like it's 1787, like we just ratified the Constitution. The founders could look at a bill today and they'd be like, yeah, I mean, that's how we wrote laws in the 1700s and in the 1800s. We are capable of such better legislation. And what kills me is that we're not using the very tools we're regulating to try to inform and shape better laws. So just as a quick example, there's a number of policies around the country. Some of them have passed into law. Some are currently proposals, which would look at imposing a hour-long or 3-hour-long chat reminder for when you're using AI. So the idea is that, hey, user X, you've been using Claude or Gemini for 3 hours. Here's a reminder that you're still doing that.
Claude already tells me.
Yeah, so there's one thing, which is we can see private side innovation occur without legislating something. But there's nothing that I've found in terms of an empirical study that shows, hey, that 3-hour reminder, that's actually going to help make folks less reliant on AI, which is presumably the outcome. What I'm fearful of is if you think about a teenage user, for example, who is using AI, I have yet to meet a teenager who gets notified that they've been, for example, playing Halo or Game of War or Call of Duty for 3 hours. And let's say Xbox says, hey, Joe, you've been playing this game for 3 hours. I don't think they sit there and go, thank you, Xbox. I will now turn this off and I'll go play outside. No, I think they say, heck yeah, 3 hours accomplished. I'm going to do 3 more. This is just one example of we need to study our laws and put actual policy analysis tools in the law itself so that we see if the law is actually achieving its intended outcome. And so that's really all I want to see. Is I don't claim to have the answers. I think that folks who have a sort of silver bullet solution to any of these AI problems are misguided because this technology is changing so quickly. We're changing so quickly about how and when and why we use these tools. And so the smartest path forward, in my opinion, is making sure we study and learn from our policy interventions, which means thinking a little bit more like scientists and less like politicians. And that can be hard for some legislators.
Absolutely. Well, that's a really interesting law that has come out because to me that implies that AI is bad.
Exactly right. There's this sort of baked-in analysis and baked-in assumptions to a lot of these laws, which are, for example, with respect to AI and mental health. Now, there are very real, very problematic instances in which users have had horrible tragedies as a result of AI use. But what we risk not allowing for are the users who are having incredibly positive mental health experiences because they're using AI. And so rather than bake an assumption about this technology is good or bad, this is where we need evidence-driven policy, right? Because for some users, in certain contexts, it could be the thing that actually saves them from making poor decisions or from taking bad actions.
Absolutely. And how are you teaching your students and yourself trying to teach people about AI in general? Because I do agree. I meet with a lot of legislators and a lot of them are hearing things and now they're definitely, 2 years ago compared to now, completely different mindset. 2 years ago, it was, this is a futuristic fake thing that I don't need to learn. And now it's, I'm scared because someone else I know is using it and I now need to learn. Mm-hmm. And I'm happy to be able to help teach people how to use it in really good ways that are not going to be, detrimental other than you're going to be producing a ton more work probably. And then have to stick to that, get to that standard. But yeah, what would you, how are you doing that?
So for me, it's really important to start with a technical understanding of AI, because as you pointed out, people fear what they don't understand. Mm-hmm. And this is a tale as old as tech, right? Anytime we have some new technology get introduced, from the printing press to the calculator to comic books, you name it, there's a wave of panicked overreaction because it's new and people aren't sure of what its effects are going to be. And so I really stress that when folks are, especially legislators, thinking about AI, they need to understand how it actually works. So, for example, when folks complain about hallucinations of, well, we need AI that only gives factually accurate answers 100% of the time, I ask them, hey, do you understand how we actually train these models? Do you understand that they're non-deterministic? Do you understand how they're pulling from a normal distribution of training data, so on and so forth? I don't do it in such a kind of question-oriented manner. But I try to walk them through, hey, here's actually how we train a model and fine-tune a model and then deploy a model. And if you go through that process of helping them understand how and why a tool works, it's kind of like that person you meet who's a really savvy car mechanic. They don't panic when that check oil sign comes on. They don't panic if there's a weird sound in the engine. They know what really is a problem and they know when to properly raise alarm bells about what you need to do to maintain your car. but they don't respond out of fear or panic. So first, I start with that basic technical understanding. Second, I would say go and using these tools and having personal experience with them. I talk with a lot of legislators, as you may have as well, who perhaps haven't used AI since 2023 or 2024. So they'll tell me, for example, I used Gemini in 2023 and it was just crap. I'm like, yeah, I agree. It was not that useful. It wasn't very helpful. When was the last time you used this tool, though? And having that sort of personal experience of learning about how and when and why these tools are actually going to be beneficial, I find is a next really helpful second step. And then third, I like to really encourage people to think about these tools from a future-oriented perspective, which is to say, we've been through prior eras of incredible technology landing in our lap, and we've done a very poor job of making sure the people who actually stand to benefit most from these technologies gain access to these tools. So there are still communities across the US that don't have high-speed internet. The digital divide is still real. And what I'm concerned about is that the people who need that therapy chatbot, the people who need some legal advice and some legal information, or who need a personalized AI tutor, won't be able to have access to that because of short-sighted and fear-based policy.
Absolutely. And we talked a little bit about the digital divide early on and wanted to wait more to get on this, to hear you on the mic about it. I definitely don't know what the next 5 years look like at all as it's rapidly evolving. How do you mitigate that digital divide that seems to be inevitable, just with some universities, some schools really putting a ban on AI and then others really welcoming it? Sounds like you are. So how do you mitigate that?
Oh boy, I have so many ideas. Some of them are pie in the sky and some of them are, I like to think, a little more practical. First and foremost, I would love to see the creation of something like an AI literacy corps. So the administration, the president's, the Trump administration recently announced the formation of the US Tech Corps. This is going to be a new kind of subset of the Peace Corps that is tasked with going around the world and helping introduce US AI tools to countries around the world. We need something like that domestically. We need really smart, really kind people to go around the country and go to Main Street and talk to that small business owner and say, hey, this is ChatGPT. Here's how you can use it to create a new website for yourself. Or, hey, here's Gemini. Check out this awesome new marketing material you can generate in 15 seconds. But it often just takes that person going to them, meeting them where they're comfortable, and showing them how to use these tools to reduce that fear of AI adoption in the first place. Second, I think we really need to champion open source AI development. For a lot of folks, the idea of getting access to ChatGPT or Gemini, if you're paying for a pro account, that's literally going to break the bank. I mean, that is just a really costly monthly expense. And so having a robust open source development, tools that can be easily downloaded and shared among communities and that are still highly capable, is a great way of lowering that financial barrier to access of these tools. And then I think finally, making sure that we have ongoing AI literacy initiatives. And this is where public schools, public libraries, trusted messengers can play a real role in hosting opportunities for people to learn about proper AI use cases. One very silly example that I'll give you. I talk to a lot of parents, and I talk to a lot of parents who are concerned about their children using tools that they themselves have never used, right? They're unsure of how to use ChatGPT or Claude. And now their kid comes home and says, hey, I just spun up this app. I'm not a parent, but I imagine if my kid came home and said I created an app, I would want to see it instantly. I would want to test it. I would want to make sure it's safe, so on and so forth. Well, we need to have a sort of culture in which parents feel comfortable giving the birds and the bees talk, as well as the bits and the bots talk, right? I'm serious. We need to normalize talking about AI out of a curiosity mindset rather than a fear-based mindset. And that's something that is a product of policy. It's a product of culture, but we need to sort of have that clear ambition if we're ever going to start to see that sort of relationship with AI develop.
What does the bits and the bots talk entail? Have you done this to your children?
I have not, because I don't. But, here I think number one is disclosure. Having kids share when and how they're using an AI tool. I think the biggest concern and the highest probability of a poor relationship between AI and a child forming is when that child is using it clandestinely, right? When they go up into their room, they're not telling anyone how they're talking to that AI tool, what they're building, so on and so forth. And so, number one, making it okay to use and share AI use cases will make sure that if any sort of problematic tendency develops, you're able to flag it pretty quickly. Second, I think saying that you're going to build and share tools together. So having that sort of relationship of, hey, you told me that you are working on this tool. Great. That's step A, that disclosure. B, let's do this together. Show me how you're using it. Show me how you're using it to study, for example. And then third, I would just say making sure that parents are trying their best to find those easy resources for staying up to date on what are the most healthy and transparent AI tools. And that's something that policy can help with as well.
What age do you think it's appropriate to have unsupervised use of AI?
Oh, boy. I'm going to give you the law professor answer, which is it depends. So I think that this is ultimately a decision that comes down to a family to decide, right? Some families will allow their kids to watch that scary movie at an early age, and they think that's proper and they think that's appropriate. Other folks are going to say, hey, you can't watch The Ring until you are out of high school. And I say you do you, because AI is ultimately a tool that has so many varied use cases for so many different families that I think a sort of cut and dry policy isn't responsive to the fact that this tool has different offerings to different families. So one example would be for a family in a rural community in, let's say, Alaska, having an AI tutor, for instance, that can be personalized to that student, that can be responsive to their learning differences, that can flag different languages, that can be aware of when they're struggling. Well, in that context, I may say, hey, younger is actually an appropriate stage for you to start to use AI somewhat unsupervised. I'm not sure I would endorse a full, never disclose any sort of AI use case to a parent, for example. In other instances, though, where that student is fortunate enough to have, let's say, robust mentors in their lives, to have a teacher that is hyper attentive to their learning differences and so on and so forth, well, then maybe AI use case should come later. But really, I think it has to be a sort of context-driven, family-driven decision.
Absolutely. I find I've been a little bit baffled lately, and my husband and I have a lot of talks about AI and where it's going, and I look back and think, was my education a waste? And that is the type of thing that I don't want my children to ever think. And it's because now, I could have 60 to 100 AI agents working for me at any given time. Got a ton right now, but I'm out of Claude tokens as per usual.
Hate when that happens.
At 10 a.m. They're like, how already? We have a pro account.
Nice.
And like our CTO is like, you need to be more efficient with the AI. Can't let it go rogue. I'm like, actually, that's true. So
yeah,
I've had to learn that. But what do you say as far as the future you're seeing with students learning, private tutoring? You're someone who's teaching at a school. Do you see it going more that direction where people are having their own homeschool and tutoring themselves using AI?
Yeah, I would certainly say that I'm already hearing of families starting to opt out of traditional education because they can make use of these tools to augment homeschooling, for example, and produce content and material that they think is more responsive either to their values or to their interests of their children. And this to me is a opportunity for policy experimentation because no one has a silver bullet on how best to integrate AI into schools right now. It is a wildly complex exercise. I think folks know that we didn't get the use of phones right in schools, but are bands the right maneuver? Some people are of mixed opinions about that. I think that's an opportunity for experimentation. Folks have flagged, for example, that we may have introduced Chromebooks too early to a lot of schools, making folks used to just typing and clacking away and being on the internet and not engaging in conversation and interpersonal relationships. And so I'm a big fan of experimentation in this regard, because if we're going to figure out how to leverage AI to help everyone achieve their maximum educational potential, I don't think a one-size-fits-all solution is going to get us there. And we're going to keep seeing new tools help address even more niche use cases. So, for example, I had a chance to talk with the founder of a AI tool provider called StudyFetch. And this is an AI tool that is just intended to help you prepare for exams. And it will generate new hypotheticals. It will create flashcards for you. It will flag when you're not getting the concept. There's a tool called Amira that is all about AI literacy that's been introduced in schools in Colorado and Louisiana. So we are just at the surface of seeing new tools get integrated into the educational setting. What I'll say is the status quo can't be the answer, because these tools have changed the game. And so for the folks who want to just carry on as is, as if AI doesn't exist, that to me is kind of an ostrich approach, putting your head in the sand, right? Where you're going to see students make use of AI tools at home. They're going to be using it in other contexts. And so again, bringing that use into the light and allowing us to have an honest and open and empirically driven conversation about that, I think is really important.
Well, those are all really great points. And it's just, there's a lot of, I think, mindset of being scared from a lot of the population. And like you said, it's a lot about education, what people, just teaching them maybe what they don't know. And I do see there being there's a gold rush right now, right? You're mentioning one area, which is teaching people how to use AI. Boom, there you go. That's a business right there.
Pretty good one.
And as a founder, this is for anybody listening who is going out into the workforce and what I look for. It's never been more important that every single person on the team prioritizes AI literacy, but also if they're not using AI and they're taking a long time to get a task done that could be done by AI, that is a very bad situation. And I will be talking to that teammate and helping educate them on how to do it. But if they're aware and they're using an old method, that's a complete waste of time, money, resources, that they could be doing something else. We do a lot of events and a lot of fun marketing, and there's things that can't be replaced by AI. There's things that simply cannot. So let's get a lot of things automated that can. So we're encouraging every single person at the company to max out their Claude limits.
Nice.
And
Token
if they're
maxers.
not, we can see and we're like, why aren't you using AI? So, I mean, from someone who's hiring people, what I look for is someone who's literate, is excited, curious, wants to use it in a lot of different ways, and wants to find new ways to automate things. They say the best engineer is a lazy engineer.
Nice.
Because they will get to the problem quicker than somebody who isn't.
Yeah.
They're going to find a way.
Well, and I think it does just take that sort of trial by error. You have to use these. You have to put them into practice, and you'll discover what's a good use case and what's a bad use case.
You hear, I'm sure, all the time, the government and legislators push back on people saying there's too few people in the conversation on AI. What do you say to those people?
Well, I would agree that we need to make this a national conversation, because I had an opportunity recently to go from Morgantown, West Virginia, hopped on a flight, ended up in Palo Alto, California. And I can tell you that the questions folks are asking about AI in West Virginia are wildly different than the questions folks are asking about AI in the Bay Area. In the Bay Area, what's AGI? When are we going to reach it? How do we put agents to best use? So on and so forth. In West Virginia, why are we building more data centers? Why are we seeing yet another instance of our natural resources go towards this technology of uncertain benefits? Why is AI hallucinating this much? Why are we seeing my students struggle because their teacher hasn't received any degree of AI literacy? And so there are just wildly different questions being asked around the country. And so if only one of those communities is in charge of making consequential policy choices with respect to AI, then we're not going to have a national approach here, and we'll have the sort of fragmentation that you and I have been discussing, where AI seems to be suited for some people, but not for everyone. And so this is where I'm really a champion of trying to get as many diverse voices involved in this AI policy conversation as possible, because I also think that the sort of deference we pay to the loudest voices right now is one of the reasons why AI feels like an all or nothing, right? Like AI is our destiny. It's the only thing that will ever define America, so on and so forth. Or AI is the thing that's going to bring about the end of the country, and we're never going to respond and recover from this moment. We've been here before in terms of panicked visions of either a utopian future or a dystopian future. It hasn't transpired. We don't live in paradise, unfortunately. We also don't live in hell, very fortunately. We usually tend to muddle through and we find our way forward, but that's only possible if we kind of bring everyone along for this very strange ride.
And I will push back a little on this one because I agree. It's very nuanced. This is going faster than any industrial revolution before. That has taken, 80 years. This is taking less than 10, like 6. And it doesn't end. The more that we build, the more these models get better, the more capabilities. And I've never I use AI all the time. I build agents. I'm loving it. It's so fun, but I am freaked out every single day with the new capabilities. So, what would you say as far as how can we speed up the education? We've talked a lot about it. I totally agree. We need to educate people on how to use it. What's the solution there?
So one good solution, not the only one, would be adhering to the Utah model. So Utah has a policy of regulatory mitigation, or what some people refer to as a regulatory sandbox. And basically, this is the idea that we should err on the side of deploying, of making available a new AI tool, subject to a lot of oversight, right? Giving people who are using the technology clear means to say, hey, actually, this use case went really poorly, or hey, this use case went really well. Think Google review on steroids and with some legal teeth, right? So in Utah, for example, there's an AI tool that can help automate prescriptions. Now, healthcare costs are a huge issue right now for a lot of Americans. And now we have this innovation in Utah where we are finding a new means to help lower the costs and improve the care that residents receive as a result of AI. Now, a lot of Americans in 49 states may not be experiencing any of that right now. Now, if an AI tool was deployed in Utah that had some red flags that wasn't proving to be useful, guess what? That's when the law should snap in. That's when we should see state attorneys general enforce existing law and hold those companies accountable. But this sort of try first mentality, where people can be exposed to what I like to refer to as incredibly boring use cases of AI.
Right.
The vast majority of positive AI use cases, they're just boring.
You mean like bill tracking?
Bill tracking? Cool. I know. It's not meant to be offensive. It's meant to be praiseworthy.
Absolutely.
Because you all have found, hey, pattern recognition, it's a big deal. Pattern recognition is what is going to allow us to detect more tumors with a higher degree of accuracy in a shorter amount of time.
Now that's cool.
It's pretty cool. It's cool, but it's really boring from a technology standpoint, and it's really boring from a potential failure mode standpoint, right? Sure. So celebrating and finding and spreading those use cases, I think, is a really sound path forward. But if we continue to sort of lean into what I like to refer to as headline-driven policy, then we're going to be in a sort of panicked area, because when every bill is a response to the latest headline, we're just swinging back and forth on a pendulum. And that creates a lot of uncertainty for people. And it gives the impression that AI is something they should never use because it's so volatile and it's not trustworthy. And so it's just about creating agile, adaptive regulatory systems that involve the people, that empower them to share how and why and when they're using AI, that I think is a strategic path forward.
And going off of that, obviously the Constitution wasn't written when we had any even idea about LLMs and AI and AGI. What do you see us potentially wanting to do or change? Where does the Constitution get in trouble?
Oh boy. So the Constitution on AI is a fascinating topic that if anyone's really interested, please show up to my office hours and we can nerd out about it for 2 hours. But the shortest story here is that the founders made a very intentional decision to move on from the Articles of Confederation. To go into brief law professor mode for a second, under the Articles of Confederation, we basically had no centralized government. We had no strong national government. We couldn't raise taxes. We couldn't set a national approach to trade, so on and so forth. And what happened? We experienced one of the worst economic depressions, second only to the Great Depression itself. Our country was really fledgling and really struggling to get by those initial years. And so we adopted the Constitution with this idea in mind. We want to make sure that on issues that require a uniform approach of regulation, the federal government can oversee those issues. On everything else, though, we want to see a high degree of policy experimentation. And that's exactly what we should see play out in AI with respect to questions about developing the frontier of these AI tools. Think the most sophisticated AI that has incredible cyber capabilities, that have incredible military ramifications, that have potential use cases for bioweapon development, so on and so forth. Those are very scary, very serious issues that require national governance. And I will raise my hand first and foremost and say I am disappointed that Congress has not taken seriously the need to regulate those very real frontier risks of AI. But I'm also going to be quick to say that this isn't something that states should see as their proper domain, because when it comes to a single state getting to shape one of the most important technologies of our era, that's a problem. So instead, what we should see is a sort of delineation of responsibility where the federal government takes on those frontier risks, the things that are going to shape national security and our long-term economic trajectory. States, though, they should have free rein, as set forth by the Constitution, to govern things like how is AI going to be used in education? How is it going to be used by their hospitals? How is it going to be used by their doctors, their lawyers, their law enforcement? Those are questions that are hyper-local. And so we should encourage and see some degree of experimentation going on at the local level.
That is interesting. So you're for AI preemption at this federal level.
So I am for selective preemption, which is what the Constitution mandates, because we've seen that throughout time, questions of foreign policy, questions of national security must be left to the federal government. So selective preemption, yes.
I definitely believe this is AI legislation. There's going to be more of it than ever because it's easier to draft bills than ever. But also there's more need than ever as things evolve and change. So that's probably going to be the majority of our legislation will be around it. How do you make sure the federal and state don't conflict?
So this is where Congress should draw very clear lines and say, with as little ambiguity as possible, these are the questions that we're going to regulate, and these are the questions that are subject to state discretion. So here, I think a somewhat imperfect delineation is the federal government needs to regulate AI development. This is the training of the models, the fine-tuning of the models, and the ultimate evaluation of their risks. This is the sort of task that will require uniform regulation, because even these incredibly well-off AI labs, they don't have enough resources, they don't have enough technical compute to train 50 different models for 50 different jurisdictions. But when it comes to issues of deployment, how are end users going to operate and apply this AI? That's great for state legislators to address. So really that's the neatest bifurcation that I would argue for. Whether we see it by this Congress, I'm not a betting man. I lost all my money in March Madness, so I don't have anything to say there.
No, it's interesting. I'm excited to see how it plays out, and I just hope that with these new models we're seeing that aren't being released. I mean, what are your thoughts on that? I think like Anthropic's Mythos that just said, sorry, this is too powerful to be released already
Yes.
in 2026. So what do you see the future of that like? And I'm sure you have a lot of thoughts.
Yes. Oh my. So it is profoundly important that we have labs like Anthropic develop clear safeguards and clear evaluations for when and how they're going to measure their model's capabilities. And we're fortunate that Anthropic has taken the measurement of its own models so seriously. Because they're able to stress test their tools, they can identify when and how it's proper to release them based off of their own core values. Now, ideally, this would be done, and Anthropic would say this itself. It's in its responsible scaling policy. This work should be done by a third party, an independent, neutral third party. Now, that could look like the federal government if Congress gets the message and recognizes that this is an issue where we need national coordination to help identify, for example, standardized tests and robust evaluations to make sure that we know what these models are capable of before we release them. But we also know that there are new organizations like Avery, led by Miles Brundage, and other AI auditing companies that take seriously this effort to try to measure what are these models actually capable of. And that's where we should see a uniform national approach. Now, I'll also flag that users, everyday users, these are policy conversations that don't impact your day-to-day of using AI, for example, to schedule your family's next trip or to develop that new memo at work. And so what I like to really encourage people to do is to distinguish between what are those frontier AI risks and what does frontier AI policy need to look like versus how do we govern and regulate, again, going back to that boring AI concept, right?
You mentioned earlier the AGI comment of what is AGI and when are we going to get there? What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, geez. I'm not sure it is a wildly productive discourse to try to precisely define, artificial general intelligence or what's super intelligence, what's transformative AI. Pick your buzzword. My issue with that is that it sucks the oxygen out of other conversations and it distracts us from more meaningful conversation, because if AGI, however you define it, is created tomorrow,
would it even be released?
Let's say it is released. I don't think it would really change day-to-day activity because we still have existing institutions that are risk averse, that have their own red tape, that have their own inertia. We still have our own need to kick the tires of new AI models and make sure they're trustworthy. So there's a lot of just very human friction to transforming the technological frontier into something that's shaping our day-to-day activities.
But with the jobs that it would replace, I mean, that's a big piece to this that I'm seeing. Like, if AGI is released, which is this all-knowing, all-seeing, all-doing, I mean, you could argue that it is here, right? From just being able to build agents, like you could argue that it's already done and replacing a lot of jobs that were in the past, something that now can be automated. If AGI could do the majority of these jobs, there would be mass unemployment.
Maybe.
Are you saying the adoption of it would be so slow because inertia and just...
Historically, that's what we've seen. And you're right that AI is different in many regards. It's moving faster than a lot of technologies. But historically, what we've seen is that even when you have electricity get created, for example, it doesn't happen overnight that everyone reforms and changes how they do business or how they design their warehouse and so on and so forth. It took a very long time for that to happen with respect to electricity. Now, will that happen faster with AI? I think so. But it's not the sort of overnight situation in which suddenly we see all companies change and adopt this AI immediately. We're already seeing that right now. We know that right now, according to Gallup polls, just about 9% of Americans use AI on a daily basis at work. That's a very low regular adoption rate because this option often doesn't get captured by AI polling. When you ask someone, do you use AI? I think just about everyone will say, yes, I use AI in some way. But what matters with respect to job replacement are questions about intensity and novelty. How frequently are you using AI? and what are you actually accomplishing with AI? And we need to pay more attention to those cases when we're talking about this very serious instance of how AI is going to transform our economy. I'd also say that none of this is preordained. We can devise better off-ramps and better reskilling opportunities for Americans to find that next job. Because I'm a very firm believer in the neediness of Americans and humans generally. If you ask somebody in the 1930s, at the height of the Great Depression, if you said great-grandma, great-great-grandma, in 50 years, people are going to be paying other people to walk dogs. Your grandma or great-great-grandma probably would have said, go fish. There's no way. That is never going to happen. We are highly creative, highly needy individuals, and we will find ways to do new and novel and creative things. Now, yes. I want to make sure we take seriously the need for smoother transitions to those opportunities, and we think about things like wage insurance, that we think about things like apprenticeships, so that the disruption is as minimal as possible. But I don't think it's productive to expect that suddenly we'll wake up and half the population is unemployed.
Absolutely. I personally see it right now as like an amplifier, right? You think even with the web development, now Claude has the capability to do. Well, a web developer, if they have a firm with a lot of clients, is now able to amplify their firm, be more efficient, create more pages, do a better job, make world-class websites versus taking weeks and weeks to do something else, and could probably 10x their revenue. So there's a lot of that, and it's kind of let's see how this plays out.
Right. And I think that goes back to the experimentation thing is let's see how this plays out. Let's get really good at measuring how it's playing out. We can make better policy and we can be more responsive if we measure things more accurately and we have that sort of responsive policy framework in place.
Well, you talked to a lot of legislators, lawyers, future attorneys. What advice would you give them that people just aren't talking about right now?
So you're a testament to this advice, which is I think the future belongs to entrepreneurial people. If you are someone who has a high degree of agency, the future is really bright because we now have tools that allow us to design things that used to take months, if not in some cases years.
Right.
And that's incredible. And if you are someone who is curious and who studies, what's a need that's not being addressed? What's an issue I care about that we can make progress on? You can make more progress than ever before. And so for the folks who are uncertain about what the future looks like, I say, just do it. Go shape it. Be the one who is taking that proactive initiative, and you're going to be in a good spot. I think for the folks who are used to having others guide them or who need to be, for lack of a better phrase, and I apologize for the pun, prompted to do something, life is going to be a little bit harder because so many people are going to be able to do so much so quickly that if you're the sort of chill on the couch and not make the most of these tools, then you may find yourself fighting a bit of an uphill battle. The second thing I'd say is that I still firmly believe that humans will, for a very long time, hopefully forever, truly value this. Interpersonal, highly meaningful conversations, going and hiking with someone, going on that incredible adventure in Montana, going on that awesome trip to Florida, having regular dinners with people you really care about or with strangers you want to learn from. Those are all experiences that will help people establish interpersonal communication. And I think we'll always find value in leaders and people who can communicate clearly. So another skill to practice.
I love it. One of the things that the team kind of makes fun of me for, a quote I've said before, which is AI is making me more human. And the reason
I love it
is because, and they laugh, but they're like, no, I guess it's true. It's true. I'm able to have more of these conversations. I'm able to meet with 20, 30 times the amount of people because I'm not spending my day doing busy work. Now, I was spending all Sunday hacking away at stuff, but that's something that's going to last me a longer period of time. I'm putting in a lot of upfront work now that's going to automate a lot of the future. So I have more free time to do the in-person
stuff.
Well,
and to think, not to speak for you, but I'm a very privileged person. I've got great eyesight. I can hear relatively well, although my wife would disagree with that. I am blessed to have, 2 good legs and 2 good arms. I can get around easily. AI, the folks who are going to have AI wearable glasses that can help them identify who is the person I'm actually talking to. The folks who are going to have AI-based efforts to help improve their brain function so they can remember who it was they actually talked to. Some of this may sound dystopian, but I think that a lot of the pushback against AI often comes from a place of what I like to refer to as AI privilege. If you have a good doctor, well, you don't really care if your AI tool can do a lot of great healthcare advice. If you have access to a lawyer, then you don't want or really feel a need for AI to improve in that regard. If you're able-bodied, then you may not really care about transformation of transportation via AI. For example, all of our awesome Waymos in Austin. But the people who really stand to benefit from this technology can experience wildly different lives. And that is so exciting to me, especially when you think about the new relationships will be established with people whose culture we don't really understand or whose language we don't speak. That is wild, right?
Yeah.
Being able to go to Uruguay or you pick the country and have meaningful conversations with folks, that to me is pretty dang cool.
Oh, I was just thinking about that use case the other day of the translation on a phone and you not having to have any delay and it can immediately translate conversation to conversation with different language. There's going to be people in relationships then who form that have never spoken the same language. And
Your
maybe
soulmate.
choose not to.
Yeah.
Exactly. Well, then the door opens up a lot more, right? You got a lot more people to meet.
More fish in the sea, that's for dang sure.
A lot more efficiency.
Yes.
You can communicate with everyone on the planet.
Yeah.
Where do you think some of the line is? We talked a little bit before this about wearables like Neuralink and things like that are going to make people superhuman. Where's the line?
This is a cultural question, in my opinion. It's something that we all have to figure out as a society. One example would be we saw, for example, that there was a company, I believe it was called Friends, that was developing a little pendant that you could wear, and it would basically record everything, transcribe every conversation. And so you go home and you'd have all these notes and you'd have, everyone's photo and so on and so forth. It just looked like a necklace. And so no one would ever know that they were being recorded or that their conversation was now going to be immortalized. How do we figure that out from a societal norms perspective? Here's how New Yorkers figured it out. They graffitied every poster and every advertisement for that tool and said, no, this is something we don't want. This is something we're not used to. And we don't want to see that develop in our community. That is awesome. We didn't ban the tool. We didn't say no one could use it. We just used the power of culture to say this is something that we don't value. And because AI is changing so quickly, having these open and honest conversations with people, which is something, in my opinion, Americans have gotten a little bad at. We're not very comfortable being open and honest and frank. And hopefully we will see a willingness to say, actually, I don't want you to use AI to, for example, write your best man speech. Or I don't want you to use AI to write that condolence card, right? We're going to see these red lines get drawn. I don't know exactly what they'll look like, but I very much encourage their formation because I think having the sort of AI-free zones is actually wildly important, right? Leaving AI outside of the dinner table or outside of the dinner room, I think is a great idea. Making sure AI isn't a part of some of your most personal relationships, that may be what you and your partner need. But you need to have those red lines because I do think that maintaining our humanness is essential. And finding that time to go walk in the woods, to get lost and so on and so forth is really important. But it's just going to vary by community, by culture, and by individual.
And that's where I see the data divide, the digital divide, really happening is when we all become cyborgs. And I had the general manager for Ultra Human Wearables on, and one of their things they say is hello cyborgs, because they say actually you're already one. You could argue that when you have a phone, you're already a cyborg, right? That we have this on us. So I do see there being a divide. I see there being a purposeful, intentional cultural divide. People say, hey, I'm not going to do that. And then people that will. And there might even be countries that are only AI and it's superhuman people, but I think there's going to be people who really say no.
I would not be surprised if that vision of the future does indeed come true. This is where I will try to practice what I preach and say, to give you the best answer possible, I would want to go talk to a bunch of philosophers. I want to talk to folks like Amanda Askell at Anthropic or Henry Shivlin, who's now at Google DeepMind. These labs are hiring philosophers to help start to address these very clear questions. And what I want to make sure, again, is that this is indeed a national conversation that we're all a part of, and that we're making those decisions out of a empirically driven, deliberative process, and not one that is kind of blown around by whatever's trending on X or whatever the New York Times happen to publish. Because oftentimes, as we've seen throughout history, the initial response to technology is not exactly one to be proud of. Yeah, there were calls to ban comic books because people were concerned that kids were reading about these vigilante heroes who were, stealing things and, doing these incredible acts of jumping around buildings and so on and so forth. But we've also seen, like in social media, that taking a completely hands-off approach and becoming sort of frogs in boiling water is also not wise.
Sure.
And so now's our time to strike the happy middle ground and be open and honest and deliberate about how we proceed.
Absolutely. And I think social media and AI, I don't know if it's comparable, because obviously we talked about, there should be a limit on the amount of time you're on AI, limit on social media. I think a lot of us put that on. I put a little alert, 15 minutes, that's a max, right? Don't get off.
Stop doom scrolling. Yeah.
You can't do it. Exactly. Even if it's positive content, it's like, what happened with that 15 minutes, right? And so I try to put the limits on, but that's self chosen. I guess when you're underage, it's when you're not.
Yes. Very tricky.
It's very challenging kind of time. But with the legislative calendar that we have, we were just talking about that before. It's annually for some states, like California, they're year-round, DC is year-round, but some states, 6 months to 3 months every year. Some states, there's 4 every 2 years. So with tech advancing this fast, what do you think about this session calendar that we have? Is that enough to keep up with all the changes?
Yeah, I think it can be. So if Texas, for example, one of those states that tends to be a little slower and irregular on its legislative activity, this is where we have to pay extreme attention to the institutional capacity of state government. What are we measuring? What are we paying attention to? And how are we making that information available to policymakers as well as to regulators within agencies? And I think this is where you can stick with that 2-year calendar if you want, so long as we're doing really good work in the interim to keep that statistical information coming, and to make sure that we're leaning into adaptive policy frameworks. So this is the sort of world in which we can and should begin to explore things like dynamic legislation. And just to spell this out, this is the idea that we can write laws that say, hey, if we ever see youth unemployment rise to above 9%, then these 3 things will happen. But if it maintains between 5 and 9%, then we're not going to do anything. If it dips below 5%, then we're going to do X, Y, and Z. We can and should begin to study dynamic legislation as an approach to get through highly turbulent times, because no one can predict the future. And so for states like Texas that have that longer period between sessions, I think it's particularly important to signal to the people that you're aware that the future could be drastically different, and to show them that you're investing in getting better expertise into government, to show them that you're collecting the relevant data, and to show them that you're preparing for many different futures, to give them that assurance that, we're not going to legislate just out of fear or out of panic, but in a responsible fashion.
What's been the biggest surprise to you having all of these AI policy conversations?
That's a fantastic question. I guess that we've still yet to grapple with the seriousness of this moment. I think that going around the country and talking to people about AI, you realize how big the gulf is between the folks who are, for lack of a better phrase, AI pilled, and the folks who aren't. The folks who talk about this on a daily basis, who are listening to the podcast about it, listening to the news, so on and so forth, it's something that is somewhat all-consuming. And for a lot of folks, it's just, the 5th highest issue on their priority list, or the 6th or the 7th or the 10th. And I would love to have seen by this point a more honest and open and resource intensive effort to have nationwide forum around this conversation. We should be having town hall meetings that are focused on AI. And I'm not saying focus just on data centers or responsive to whatever the issue of the day is, but let's start talking on a regular basis and exercising those democratic muscles to try to be as deliberative about this as possible. I don't know if that's surprising, but maybe that's the frustrating thing for me is I really hope that folks get the seriousness of this and the seriousness of responding thoughtfully.
That's a great answer. Well, you said to me, I think the term AI is as popular as the term ICE. That's correct?
Yeah, AI in a recent poll was polling lower than ICE in terms of favorability.
And why do you think that is?
I think that it's a very understandable sense that AI is something that is new, novel, and in that regard, somewhat scary. Because when folks go read the headlines, they see that AI is only framed in dystopian or utopian terms. And for many Americans, they haven't had that regular engagement with AI. And so until we have that more thoughtful demonstration of new AI tools to everyday Americans, and until we have parents who feel equipped to give that bits and the bots talk, and until we have lawmakers who are creating opportunities for people to learn and experience how AI is being developed, I think we'll continue to see that fear, and people just don't react well to fear.
They sure don't. Well, in the next 5 years, where do you see AI governance going?
If I had to guess, I think the biggest thing is we're going to see this get framed more and more as a national security priority. We know that China is investing incredibly in the entirety of its AI tech stack. So thinking about its energy production, thinking about the data it's gathering, thinking about the talent it's training and the models that it's deploying. China is really going all in on making sure they lead in AI. And by virtue of having models like Mythos, so Anthropic's latest model, which showed an incredibly high capability when it comes to identifying and exploiting software vulnerabilities, we know that these tools in the wrong hands can lead to significant harm and significant instability. And so if this is where we are in 2026, I don't see that necessarily being diminished. I'm optimistic that we will find ways, for example, to better study and understand and share evaluation tactics across countries so that we know when models are of particularly high capabilities and that we can reach some degree of agreement like we have on nuclear weapons that we're not going to use them, or we're going to institute treaties in some regard to mitigate the likelihood of their deployment. I'm also hopeful that we will see more states like Utah and more jurisdictions like Utah really say we need to be outcome oriented about how and when we deploy AI. The most important question to me with respect to when and how to use AI is compared to what? For many Americans, for example, if it's not an AI chatbot for their mental health resources, it's nothing. It's not as though there's a therapist standing on the corner that they're ignoring and instead they're just using their phone. No, for a lot of folks, they don't have access to the expertise that they need to navigate very tricky situations. So I would love to see further investment and adoption and deployment of sophisticated AI tools to just help people with day-to-day life. And then the final thing I'd say to keep an eye out for in the next 5 years, robotics. Right now, labs are still having a heck of a hard time actually developing AI tools that can pick things up, navigate weird directions, and put them in the proper boxes and so on and so forth. But as we've seen with this technology and as we've discussed, today's AI is always going to be the worst AI we've ever used. So I'd expect a lot of advances in robotics.
I'm excited about that.
Could be pretty cool.
Things. I mean, there's the household robot. I don't want it to look humanoid though.
Yes.
Tip for any founder: don't create a robot that looks like a person. Make it like R2-D2.
I would like. Or what do you think about like an animal? Like a
that would be fun. I mean, But if it's too cute,
Oh,
there's just strange
I see.
stuff
Okay,
that can happen.
R2D2. I would get an
Something like
R2D2.
R2D2. I would do that as long as it could get upstairs and clean the dishes.
Yeah,
Like,
maybe it will like hover. Maybe it can just fly around. Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
Well, coming into a lightning round.
Okay, let's do it.
Got a bunch of questions, and we'll see how short an answer you'll have for these, because I know you can get.
I understand the
weeds.
assignment. No, I will.
All right.
I will be lightning round.
Let's do it. Okay, biggest myth about AI regulation.
Data centers are destroying the planet.
One federal agency doing AI governance really well.
Department of Labor.
One state you're watching really closely on AI policy, and why?
California, because what happens in California doesn't stay in California.
Okay, paper, pen, or AI drafted first when you're working through a hard legal argument.
Pen and paper for sure.
Most underrated voice in the AI policy conversation.
I'm going to go with a new guy I just met, Anish Papu. And that's partially because I hadn't met him before, but he's got some really interesting ideas.
Love it. Something you believed about AI governance 2 years ago that you now no longer believe.
I'm not sure it's a whole change in perspective, but how and when and why we should collect data.
Oh, that's a good one. We could go into a whole podcast
There's
about
a
that
lot
one.
there. Yeah.
I'll have to have you back on to do it.
Challenge accepted. That sounds great.
Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. Where can everyone find you, see the work you're doing, see your research, all of that?
Oh, well, please check out the Scaling Laws podcast for those folks who want to do more AI policy chats. You can find me on X and Blue Sky at Kevin T. Frazier, Frazier, the cool way to spell it. You got to throw a Z in there. And then if folks want to reach out on LinkedIn or anything like that, happy to respond. And if anyone's ever in Austin, they can get together with us. We can do breakfast tacos or whatever. Yeah,
we need to go to the biscuit place, I think.
Bad Bird or Big Bird.
I know. I saw
Bird Biscuit.
Have to go.
There we go.
Thank you so much. You've been a pleasure.
Thank you. It's been a hoot.